Grief does funny things to ruthless men. It doesn't make them soft. It makes them hollow. Lincoln buried his wife 3 years ago, leaving a piece of his rotting soul in the dirt with her. He thought the cemetery was a place for ghosts, a quiet patch of earth where the past stayed buried. He was wrong. When a notoriously cold crime boss finds a bruised, freezing girl aggressively defending his dead wife's headstone, the shadows crack wide open. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a reckoning. Rain slashed against the granite angels of St. Jude's Cemetery, washing the soot of the city into the manicured grass. Lincoln Costa stood 20 feet from the family plot, water soaking through the shoulders of his bespoke wool coat. He didn't feel the chill. He hadn't felt much of anything since Noreen's heart monitor flatlined 36 months ago. Funerals in his world were theatrical productions. Black cars, fake tears, enemies shaking his hand while calculating how quickly they could carve up his territory. But the anniversaries were quiet. On this day, Lincoln came alone. No bodyguards, no trailing black SUVs, just a widower standing in the downpour punishing himself with the silence. He stepped onto the gravel path, the crunch of his Oxfords heavy and rhythmic. Lightning flared briefly, turning the midnight graveyard into a stark, washed-out photograph. That was when he saw her. A shape huddled tight against the polished black marble of Noreen's headstone. Lincoln stopped. His hand instinctively slid beneath his coat fingers, brushing the cold steel of his holster. Rival syndicates didn't typically send assassins to graveyards, but Lincoln hadn't survived this long by banking on human decency. He moved silently, closing the distance. As he got closer, the shape resolved into something pathetic. Not a hitman. A girl. She was sitting in the mud, her knees pulled to her chest, shivering so violently her teeth audibly clicked. She wore a thin, torn denim jacket completely saturated. Her dark hair was plastered to her skull. In her right hand she gripped a heavy, rusted iron pipe. Lincoln stepped into her line of sight. She scrambled backward, pressing her spine against the marble. She didn't scream, but her grip on the pipe tightened until her knuckles turned a stark, bone white. The streetlights from the distant avenue caught the bruising around her left eye, a nasty mottled purple that spoke of a recent, brutal impact. "Get up," Lincoln said. His voice was a flat, grating rasp. He didn't do pity. The girl stared at him, her chest heaving. "Step back," she croaked. Her voice was shredded, barely a whisper over the falling rain. She dragged the pipe up, pointing it at his chest. "You don't touch this grave. You don't come near it." Lincoln narrowed his dark eyes. He looked past her. Someone had taken a sledgehammer to the neighboring headstone, his grandfather's. Pieces of marble were scattered across the wet grass. 2 cans of neon spray paint lay discarded in the mud. Someone had tried to deface the Costa family plot. And this 80-pound stray had fought them off. "Who are you?" Lincoln asked, his tone shifting marginally from lethal to intensely curious. "I said step back." She tried to stand, but her left ankle gave out. She collapsed into the mud with a sharp hiss of pain, dropping the pipe. She immediately scrambled to retrieve it, dragging herself through the muck to place her body between Lincoln and Noreen's name. She was a barricade of skin and broken bones. "They told me they were coming back." She gasped, rain washing over her bruised face. "I won't let them touch her. You hear me? You'll have to cave my skull in first." Lincoln looked at his dead wife's name etched in the stone. Noreen Costa, beloved. Then he looked at the feral girl bleeding into the soil. He didn't know her. In all his years with Noreen, he had never seen this face. Yet here she was, freezing to death in a thunderstorm to protect a slab of rock. Lincoln pulled his hand away from his gun. He unbuttoned his soaked overcoat, pulling it off his shoulders in one fluid motion. He tossed it. The heavy, warm wool landed over the girl's trembling shoulders. She flinched, batting at the fabric as if it were on fire. "Don't touch me, I don't want—" "Shut up," Lincoln said, stepping forward and gripping her upper arm. His touch was firm, inescapable. "You're hypothermic, and you're bleeding on my wife's grave." The fight drained out of her the moment he said, "my wife." Her wide, terrified eyes flicked from his face to the headstone, then back to him. Recognition dawned, followed immediately by a wave of pure, unfiltered exhaustion. The iron pipe slipped from her fingers. "You're Lincoln," she whispered. "I am." He hauled her to her feet. She was entirely weightless. It made him sick to his stomach, the frailty of her. "Walk." "I can't." Lincoln didn't waste time arguing. He scooped her up. She stiffened, a panicked whimper escaping her throat, but she didn't fight him. She was too cold. He carried her down the gravel path, leaving the desecrated graves behind. He didn't look back. The dead could wait. The living was suddenly far more complicated. The Costa estate sat on 10 acres of high ground overlooking the city, walled off by wrought iron surveillance cameras and men who didn't smile. It was a fortress disguised as a mansion. Lincoln carried the girl through the front doors, ignoring the alarmed look on his head of security's face. "Boss?" Paul stepped forward, his hand hovering near his earpiece. "You want I should call a doctor? Call Dr. Evans. Tell him to bring a suture kit and a concussion protocol." Lincoln ordered, striding past the foyer and into the massive, sterile living room. He deposited the girl onto a leather sofa. She immediately curled into a tight ball, wrapping Lincoln's oversized coat around herself. She was dripping dirty rainwater onto a $50,000 rug. Lincoln didn't care. "Get her dry clothes. Tea. Something hot," Lincoln snapped at the housekeeper, Maria, who had hurried in from the hallway. 10 minutes later, the girl was sitting by the roaring gas fireplace. She was swallowed up in a pair of grey sweatpants and a thick woolen sweater Maria had dug out of a guest room. Her hair was towel-dried, sticking up in messy spikes. The bruising on her face looked worse under the harsh, recessed lighting. Her lip was split. Lincoln sat in an armchair opposite her, a glass of amber liquid resting on his knee. He hadn't changed out of his wet suit. He just watched her. She stared into the flames, her hands wrapped tightly around a ceramic mug of tea. The shaking had subsided to a dull, constant tremor. "Name," Lincoln said. She didn't look at him. "Hazel. Hazel Brooks." "Why were you at St. Jude's, Hazel Brooks?" Hazel took a slow sip of her tea. She swallowed hard, as if the hot liquid hurt her throat. "I go there sometimes. To talk." "To my wife." "Yes. Why?" Hazel finally looked at him. Her eyes were a pale, washed-out green, ancient and exhausted. There was no intimidation in them. Most people couldn't hold Lincoln's gaze for more than a few seconds. They felt the violence humming beneath his skin and looked away. Hazel looked right through it. She used to volunteer at the East Side Women's Shelter. Hazel said, her voice raspy but steady. 4 years ago, before she got sick, Lincoln frowned. He knew about the shelter. Noreen had poured his dirty money into clean charities. It was her way of balancing his scales. "I was a resident." Hazel continued. "I got out of a bad situation. Boyfriend. He liked to use his fists. I ended up at the shelter with nothing. No ID, no money, no shoes. Noreen was working the intake desk that night." Lincoln leaned back. He could picture it. Noreen with her soft smile and bottomless patience handing this shattered girl a blanket. It felt like a lifetime ago, a different universe. "She didn't just process my paperwork," Hazel said, staring back into the fire. "She sat with me. She held my hand while the police took my statement. She bought me clothes out of her own pocket. When I finally got a job waiting tables, she paid my first and last month's rent for a studio apartment." Hazel's voice cracked. She took a shuddering breath. "She checked on me, every week, until she didn't." Lincoln gripped his glass tighter. The ice clinked sharply. "She got sick." "I know," Hazel said softly. I tried to visit her at the hospital, but your men wouldn't let me onto the floor. I wasn't family. I was just some street trash. Lincoln remembered the heavy security during Noreen's final weeks. He had been terrified of his enemies using her as leverage. He had locked down the entire oncology ward. Nobody got in without his explicit approval. He had kept Noreen safe from bullets only for the cancer to hollow her out from the inside. "So you go to her grave," Lincoln said, his voice dropping an octave. "Every Tuesday," Hazel said, "and today, because it's the anniversary." "And the men with the sledgehammer." Hazel's jaw tightened. 3 kids, looked like bangers from the south side. They were laughing, spraying paint on the statues. When they moved toward Noreen's stone, She shrugged a stiff, painful movement. "I found a pipe." "They beat you." "I broke one of their jaws." Hazel replied, a flicker of dark pride in her eyes. "They hit me a few times and ran off." Lincoln stared at her. She was a ghost of a girl, a bruised reed, but she had thrown herself in front of a sledgehammer for a woman who was already dead. It defied his logic. In Lincoln's world, loyalty was bought with blood or money. It was transactional. Once you were gone, the loyalty vanished. "You're a fool," Lincoln stated coldly. "They could have killed you." Hazel let out a short, cynical laugh. It was a dry, hollow sound. "So what? My life isn't exactly a prize, Mr. Costa. I owe Noreen. She gave me my life back. The least I could do was protect her name." The front door chimed, and moments later Dr. Evans was escorted into the room. He patched Hazel up with clinical efficiency. 2 stitches in her eyebrow, an ice pack for her cheek, a brace for her sprained ankle. Hazel didn't flinch once. She stared blankly at the wall detached from her own body. When the doctor left, Lincoln stood up. "Maria prepared a room for you down the hall," he said. "You'll stay here tonight? I'll have Paul drive you home tomorrow." Hazel shook her head. "I don't need your charity. I just needed to get warm." "It's not a request," Lincoln said, his tone turning absolute. "Those punks saw your face. If they know who you were protecting, they might come looking for you. You stay." He didn't wait for her to argue. He turned and walked to his study, closing the heavy oak door behind him. He poured himself another drink, staring out the window into the driving rain. He had brought a stray into his fortress. He told himself it was just a practical measure, repaying a debt on his wife's behalf, but deep down he knew the truth. For the first time in 3 years, the house didn't feel entirely like a tomb. Sleep was a luxury Lincoln rarely afforded himself. When he did close his eyes, he usually saw blood. Tonight was no different. At 3 a.m., the house was submerged in a suffocating silence. Lincoln sat at the expansive granite island in the kitchen, bathed in the blue glow of a tablet. He was reviewing shipping manifests for the docks, but the numbers were blurring together. A faint sound broke the quiet. The padding of bare feet on hardwood. Lincoln didn't reach for his gun. He just looked up as Hazel shuffled into the kitchen. She looked worse than she had hours ago. The bruising had settled into a stark, ugly black across her cheekbone. She favored her right leg, dragging the braced left ankle slightly. She stopped when she saw him clutching the edges of the oversized sweater. "Did I wake you?" she asked, her voice raspy from sleep and trauma. "I don't sleep," Lincoln replied, turning off the tablet. "Thirsty?" She nodded. Lincoln stood fetching a clean glass from the cabinet and filling it with filtered water from the fridge. He set it on the island. She limped over and took it, drinking it down in 3 long gulps. "Nightmares?" Lincoln asked. It wasn't a sympathetic question. It was clinical. He knew the signs. The wide, glassy eyes, the shallow breathing, the hypervigilance. Hazel set the glass down. "Something like that." She looked around the cavernous kitchen with its stainless steel appliances and imported marble. "It's too quiet here. I'm used to sirens, and neighbors screaming. You get used to the silence, Lincoln said. Eventually it just rings in your ears. Hazel looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the rigid set of his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man expecting an attack from his own shadow. You miss her, Hazel said softly. Lincoln's jaw tightened. Don't psychoanalyze me, Hazel. You don't know me. I know grief, she countered, leaning against the counter. She didn't back down. That lack of fear frustrated him and fascinated him in equal measure. It makes you mean. It makes you isolate yourself. You think if you care about anything else, it's a betrayal. I run a criminal syndicate, Lincoln said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. I'm mean because it keeps me breathing. Hazel offered a small, sad smile. Noreen knew who you were, what you did. She chose to look past it. No, she didn't. Hazel corrected him. She saw all of it, the blood, the dirt, the cruelty, and she loved you anyway. But it terrified her. Lincoln went utterly still. The air in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. What did you just say? Hazel crossed her arms, suddenly looking defensive. I said she was scared. Noreen was never scared of me. Not of you, Hazel said quickly. For you, and of the people around you. Lincoln took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The mob boss had fully replaced the grieving widower. His eyes were cold, calculating. Explain. Hazel swallowed hard, stepping back slightly, but she held her ground. The last time I saw her, before she got really sick and went into the hospital, she came to my apartment. She looked exhausted. Paranoid. Noreen didn't get paranoid. She was pragmatic. She was terrified, Lincoln, Hazel insisted, using his first name without permission. She told me she found something, in your home office, while you were out of town in Chicago. Lincoln's mind raced. Chicago. 4 years ago, he had gone to settle a dispute with a Midwestern outfit. He had been gone for 5 days. What did she find? Lincoln demanded, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know, Hazel said. She wouldn't tell me. She said it was better if I didn't know. Lincoln scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. You're lying. Noreen would have come to me. If someone in my crew was threatening her, or if she found something dangerous, she would have told me. She couldn't. Hazel fired back, her own anger finally rising to match his. Because it implicated someone you trusted. She said if she told you, it would start a war. A war you couldn't win from the inside. Lincoln slammed his hand flat against the granite countertop. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot in the silent house. Hazel flinched, but she didn't retreat. Give me a name, Lincoln growled. She didn't give me a name. Hazel shouted back, her chest heaving. She just gave me a box. Silence crashed back down upon them, heavy and suffocating. Lincoln stared at the bruised, broken girl in front of him. A box. Hazel nodded, her breathing shallow. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small. A small safety deposit box key and a sealed envelope. She made me swear on my life that I wouldn't open it. She said to keep it hidden. If she died from the cancer, she told me to throw it in the river. And if she didn't, if something happened to her before the cancer took her, I was supposed to mail it to a journalist at the Tribune. Lincoln felt a cold sweat break out along his spine. The room was spinning just slightly. The foundation of his reality, the narrative he had clung to for 3 agonized years, was beginning to fracture. Noreen had died of stage 4 lymphoma. The doctors had been clear. It was tragic, it was natural, it was unstoppable. But if she had found something, if she was threatening to expose someone in his inner circle. Where is the box? Lincoln asked. Hazel looked down at her hands. I buried it. Where she looked back up at him, her pale green eyes resolute. Under the floorboards of my old apartment, the one Noreen paid for. We're going to get it, Lincoln said, turning away to grab his keys from a valet tray near the door. Now? Hazel asked, her eyes widening. It's 3 in the morning and it's pouring rain. Plus, I don't live there anymore. The landlord changed the locks months ago. I don't care if he paved over the building with concrete, Lincoln said, pulling a Glock 19 from a drawer and sliding it into his waistband. He grabbed a dark jacket and threw it on. He looked at Hazel, the hollow numbness that had plagued him for 3 years entirely gone, replaced by a terrifying, burning clarity. Get your shoes on, Hazel, Lincoln commanded. We have a grave to dig up. The city at 3 in the morning was a sprawling concrete graveyard. Lincoln drove a matte black sedan, a ghost moving through the flooded streets. The heavy, rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers was the only sound inside the cabin. Hazel sat in the passenger seat, drowning in his oversized jacket. She stared out the window, watching the neon signs bleed into the wet asphalt. She hadn't asked where they were going or how they would get in. She just pointed directions with a bruised, trembling finger. Take the next exit, she said quietly. It's off 4th and Ridge. Lincoln banked the wheel. The car slipped seamlessly into a neighborhood the city had long forgotten. Streetlights flickered and died above cracked pavements. Scaffolding gripped the sides of decaying brick facades like metal cages. It was a place where people disappeared. He pulled the car onto a narrow, debris-choked alleyway and killed the engine. The silence rushed back in, heavy and expectant. Which building? Lincoln asked, his voice low in the dark cabin. The 5-story walk-up, 2nd floor, window facing the alley. Hazel unbuckled her seatbelt. Her hands were shaking again. Not from the cold this time. Lincoln watched her for a beat. He reached over and hit the door lock. You wait here. It's my apartment. Hazel shot back, turning to face him. Her green eyes caught the faint glow of the dashboard. I know which floorboard it's under. You'll wake the whole block, tearing the place apart. I don't tear things apart. I take them apart. I'm coming with you. She unlocked the door and stepped out into the rain before he could argue. Lincoln swore under his breath. He stepped out, scanning the alley. 2 junkies were huddled under an awning near the dumpster. They took one look at the broad-shouldered man in the dark coat and melted into the shadows. Survival instinct. He caught up to Hazel at the rusted security door of the building. The glass was shattered, replaced by a warped piece of plywood. The intercom panel hung by a single red wire. Lincoln didn't bother looking for a key. He gripped the door handle, braced his boot against the frame, and pulled with a sharp, violent jerk. The rusted locking mechanism sheared off. The door groaned open, quietly. Lincoln murmured, drawing his gun. He held it down at his side, hidden by the folds of his coat, but ready. The hallway smelled of stale cabbage, cheap marijuana, and profound despair. The carpet underfoot was spongy with rot. Hazel led the way up the narrow stairwell, favoring her uninjured ankle. She moved with practiced silence, a ghost in her own right. They reached the 2nd floor. Apartment 2B. The door was heavy steel, painted a peeling mustard yellow. A new deadbolt gleamed silver against the grime. Lincoln stepped past Hazel. He produced a set of tension wrenches from his pocket. The mob wasn't just about breaking knees, it was about access. It took him 20 seconds. The deadbolt clicked open with a satisfying metallic snap. He pushed the door inward, leading with the muzzle of his Glock. The apartment was empty, stripped bare. The landlord was gutting it. Rolls of stained carpet lay in the center of the living room, and the plaster walls were pockmarked with holes. Hazel slipped past him, making a straight line for the bedroom. "Watch your step," she whispered. "There are nails." She knelt in the corner of the small, cramped room, right beneath a window streaked with grime. She dug her fingers into the gap between 2 wide, warped oak floorboards. She grunted, straining against the friction. Lincoln knelt beside her. He holstered his weapon and wedged his pocket knife into the seam. He levered the blade upward. The ancient wood shrieked, popping free of its rusted nails. Hazel reached into the dark, dusty cavity. Her hand emerged, clutching a thick object wrapped entirely in silver duct tape. It was the size of a paperback book. I didn't know what to do with it. Hazel said, her voice dropping to a raw whisper as she stared at the package. Dust clung to the adhesive. When she died, the news said it was the cancer. But I remembered how scared she looked, how she made me swear. So I just left it here. I figured if I threw it in the river, I was throwing away the last piece of her. Lincoln took the package from her hands. It was heavy, dense. He didn't open it. Not here. This place was exposed, vulnerable. He shoved the package into his deep coat pocket. "We're done here," Lincoln said, standing up and pulling her to her feet. They made it back to the car without incident. Lincoln locked the doors and started the engine, blasting the heat to cut the damp chill that had seeped into their bones. But he didn't put the car in drive. He pulled the duct-taped package from his pocket and set it on his lap. He stared at it. For 3 years he had believed his wife's only enemy was her own failing cells. Now a taped bundle of secrets sat heavy on his thighs, promising to rewrite every memory he had of her final months. Hazel watched him from the passenger seat. She didn't push. She knew what it was like to stand on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the courage to jump. Lincoln flicked his knife open and sliced through the tape. The tape gave way with a sticky, tearing sound. Inside was a small, flat steel lockbox, the kind used for petty cash. It wasn't locked. Lincoln flipped the lid open. Inside sat a small brass key, the kind used for a bank deposit box, and a thick manila envelope sealed with wax. Noreen had always loved sealing wax. It was a quaint, old-world habit. The wax was deep crimson, stamped with the letter C. Lincoln's hands, which had remained perfectly steady while staring down rival cartels and federal prosecutors, trembled slightly. He cracked the wax seal. He slid the contents out. A stack of paper, financial ledgers, bank routing numbers printed on the letterhead of a Cayman Islands holding company, and a handwritten letter on Noreen's heavy cream-colored stationery. Lincoln turned on the overhead dome light. The harsh yellow glow washed over Noreen's familiar, elegant script. "Lincoln, if you are reading this, my body failed me before I could fix this mess. Or God forbid he found out what I knew." Lincoln's breath hitched. He forced his eyes to track to the next line. 3 months ago, I was looking through your home office for the tax documents for the shelter. You left your secondary safe open. I wasn't prying, Lincoln. You know I never pried. But I saw a ledger that didn't match the shelter's intake files. I pulled the thread. Someone has been using the women's shelter to launder millions. But they aren't just washing money, Lincoln. They are intentionally leaving a paper trail that points directly to you. A federal trail. RICO. Lincoln's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. The shelter was Noreen's project, but it was legally in his name. It was the one piece of clean real estate he owned. If the feds found dirty money there, they wouldn't just take the shelter. They would use it to unravel his entire empire. I confronted him, the letter continued. I was stupid. I thought I could appeal to his loyalty. I thought I could quietly make him stop before you found out and did something unforgivable. Lincoln stopped reading. He looked up, staring out through the rain-streaked windshield. Him. He looked back down. Vincent. The name hit Lincoln like a physical blow to the sternum. Vincent Thorne was dead no weight. Vincent Morrow. Vincent Morrow. His underboss. His oldest friend. The man who had introduced him to Noreen 12 years ago. The man who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him at the cemetery, handing him a handkerchief as Noreen's casket was lowered into the earth. Vincent laughed at me, Lincoln. He told me the cancer was already eating me alive, and that if I told you, you would go to war with him. He said a civil war within the family would stress you, maybe get you killed. He said if I loved you, I would stay silent and die quietly and let him take the throne peacefully when the feds locked you away. I couldn't tell you. You were already so broken by my diagnosis. If I told you Vincent betrayed you, you would have burned the city to the ground. You would have been careless. I needed to gather proof. Concrete proof. That is what this key is for. It goes to a box at First Security on Fifth Avenue. It holds the original hard drives with Vincent's digital signatures. I gave this to Hazel because she is entirely invisible to Vincent. She is off the board. I'm sorry, Lincoln. I tried to protect you. Don't let my death be the thing that destroys you. Use this. Cut him out. Survive. I love you. Noreen. Lincoln sat in the suffocating silence of the car. The rain drummed relentlessly against the roof. Vincent, it wasn't just the theft. It wasn't just the setup. It was the cruelty. Vincent had cornered a dying woman, weaponizing her love and her terminal illness to keep her silent. He had let Noreen carry the crushing weight of his betrayal to her grave, entirely alone. Lincoln folded the letter. His movements were slow, mechanical. He placed it back into the envelope, tucked the envelope into the lockbox, and set the box on the center console. Hazel was watching him. She had seen men break before. She knew the signs of an impending explosion. But Lincoln didn't explode. He didn't scream. He didn't smash his fists against the steering wheel. Instead, a chilling, absolute calm settled over his features. The hollow emptiness that had haunted his eyes for 3 years vanished. It was replaced by a dark, fathomless void. Lincoln. Hazel whispered. Lincoln turned his head slowly to look at her. The man staring back at her wasn't the grieving widower who had wrapped her in his coat. He was the apex predator of the city's underworld fully awakened. You did well, Hazel, Lincoln said. His voice was smooth, stripped of all emotion. You protected her. You kept your promise. What did she say? Hazel asked, her voice trembling slightly. She gave me a name. Lincoln shifted the car into gear. And a purpose. What are you going to do? Lincoln pulled the sedan away from the curb. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt. He didn't look back at the rotting apartment building. He was already looking miles ahead. Vincent Morrow thinks he buried my wife with a secret. Lincoln said softly, the words hanging in the cold air. I am going to unbury him. Dawn arrived like a reluctant guest, casting a weak grey light over the Costa estate. Lincoln bypassed the grand driveway and pulled the sedan straight into the underground garage. The heavy steel door slid shut behind them, sealing them in the concrete bunker. He cut the engine. The silence was immediate and absolute. Come on, Lincoln said, stepping out of the car. He didn't wait for Hazel. He was already moving toward the private elevator that led to his study. Hazel scrambled out her bruised ankle, protesting the sudden movement. She hurried to keep up. The adrenaline of the night was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep ache and the sharp realization that she had just crossed a line she could never uncross. She was walking side by side with the head of the Costa family, holding the key to a mafia civil war. The elevator doors opened into Lincoln's sprawling office. Dark mahogany leather bindings and bulletproof glass overlooking the city. It was the room of a man who ruled. Paul was already there. The head of security stood by the large desk, nursing a black coffee. He took one look at Lincoln's face and set the mug down. Paul had been with the family for 20 years. He knew the difference between Lincoln's grief and Lincoln's wrath. Boss. Paul said, his posture straightening. You went out. Lock the gate. Lincoln ordered, tossing his wet jacket onto a chair. He walked behind his desk, pulling the small brass key from his pocket and setting it on the leather blotter. Nobody comes onto the property. Cut the external camera feeds from the cloud and route them entirely to the internal server. Pull the guards from the perimeter and put them at the doors. Arm them with long rifles. Paul didn't blink. Are we under attack? We are preparing for one. Lincoln replied. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto his head of security. Where is Vincent right now? Paul frowned, clearly thrown by the question. Mr. Morrow, he's at his place in the Heights. He has the sit-down with the Harbor Union reps at noon. You want me to pull him in? No. Lincoln opened a heavy desk drawer and retrieved a satellite phone, tossing it onto the desk. I want you to put eyes on him. Send 2 men you trust with your life. Not family men. Independent contractors. I want to know where he goes, who he speaks to, and what he eats for breakfast. If he heads toward the airport, you shoot out his tires. Paul's jaw tightened. In the hierarchy of the syndicate, Vincent Morrow was untouchable. He was family. An order to surveil the underboss and potentially fire upon him was a declaration of war. Understood, Paul said quietly. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He turned and walked out of the office to make the calls. Lincoln watched him go, then turned his attention back to Hazel. She was standing awkwardly by the elevator doors, hugging herself. In the harsh morning light, she looked incredibly fragile. The bruise on her cheek was a vibrant, ugly purple. Sit down, Hazel, Lincoln said, gesturing to a heavy leather chair opposite his desk. She limped over and sank into the upholstery. She looked at the brass key resting on the desk. You're going to kill him. It wasn't a question. I am going to dismantle him, Lincoln corrected gently. Vincent spent 3 years building a federal trap for me while pretending to mourn my wife. A bullet to the back of the head is too quick. I need the hard drives. I need to see the architecture of his lie. And me? Hazel asked. Her voice wavered. What happens to me now? Lincoln leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. You have a choice. I can give you a bag of clean cash, a new passport, and a car. You can drive away right now. Start over somewhere warm. Vincent doesn't know you exist, and as long as you stay quiet, he never will. Hazel stared at him. And the other option? You stay here, Lincoln said flatly. In this house, behind my guards and my gates. Until this is finished, it's safer, but it means you are fully in it. Hazel looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were still scraped from the iron pipe at the cemetery. She thought about her tiny, miserable apartment. She thought about the waitressing job that barely paid for groceries. She thought about Noreen sitting with her in the sterile clinic room, wiping away her tears and telling her she was worth saving. She looked back up at Lincoln. Her pale green eyes were hard. I'm staying. Lincoln studied her face. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the refusal to look away. She was a broken thing, but she wasn't weak. Maria will bring you breakfast, Lincoln said, opening his laptop. Eat, sleep, do not leave the house. Where are you going? Lincoln picked up the brass key, the metal catching the faint morning light. The bank opens at 9. I have a withdrawal to make. First Security Bank catered to the kind of wealth that demanded absolute discretion. There were no teller lines, no chained pens, no screaming children. Just polished marble floors, hushed voices, and men in tailored suits who guarded secrets for a living. Lincoln walked through the heavy glass doors at exactly 9:02 a.m. He wore a charcoal grey suit, freshly pressed, hiding the Glock resting comfortably in his shoulder holster. He looked like a wealthy hedge fund manager, a titan of industry. He didn't look like a man whose world was currently burning to the ground. The bank manager, a balding man named Mr. Harrison, greeted him immediately. Mr. Costa, an honor to see you so early, Harrison said, offering a practiced, oily smile. How can we assist you today? I need access to a box. Lincoln said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. Box 408. Harrison's smile faltered slightly. He checked a tablet in his hands. Box 408. Of course, that box is registered to... Mrs. Noreen Costa. My deepest condolences again, sir. Do you have the physical key? We will need a death certificate and probate paperwork to transfer access standard policy. I have the key, Lincoln interrupted, producing the small brass object and holding it between his fingers. And I am not transferring access. I am opening my dead wife's box. Now. Lincoln didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet, terrifying gravity in his tone sucked the air out of the room. Harrison swallowed hard, nodding quickly. Right this way, sir. The vault was located in the basement behind 3 feet of reinforced steel. Harrison led him through the gate, retrieved the bank's master key, and brought him to a wall of brushed aluminum doors. Box 408 was near the bottom. Harrison inserted his key and turned it. Lincoln did the same. The locking mechanism clicked heavily. I will leave you to your privacy, Harrison murmured, practically sprinting out of the vault. Lincoln pulled the long metal drawer free. It was surprisingly heavy. He carried it to one of the private viewing tables and lifted the lid. Inside sat 3 solid-state hard drives sealed in anti-static bags. There was also a single handwritten note on top. Follow the money, Lincoln. It always leads home. Lincoln pocketed the drives, shoved the note into his wallet, and left the bank. An hour later, Lincoln sat in a windowless room in the sub-basement of the Costa estate. The air conditioning hummed loudly, keeping the massive servers cool. Felix, a 20-something hacker, who looked like he hadn't slept since the Obama administration, was typing furiously on a mechanical keyboard. Felix was on Lincoln's payroll to keep the syndicate's communications encrypted. Today he was earning his yearly salary in an hour. Okay, Felix muttered, pushing his glasses up his nose. He hit the enter key. Code cascaded down his 3 monitors. These drives are encrypted, but the password was just her birth date, not exactly Fort Knox. Unpacking the files now. Lincoln stood behind him, his arms crossed over his chest. What am I looking at? Give it a second. Boom. Okay. Spreadsheets. A lot of them. Felix clicked through a few folders, his eyes darting across the data. He let out a low whistle. Boss, this is bad. Show me. Felix pointed a nicotine-stained finger at the center screen. This is the ledger for the East Side Women's Shelter. These are the charitable donations, clean money. But look at these secondary deposits. He highlighted a column of numbers, hundreds of thousands of dollars trickling in on a weekly basis. Shell companies? Felix explained, pulling up a secondary window. Registered in Panama, the Cayman, Cyprus. The money funnels into the shelter's accounts as anonymous philanthropic grants. Then it gets immediately wired out to legitimate construction firms, contracted to build the new shelter wings. Construction firms owned by Vincent. Lincoln stated quietly. Exactly. Felix nodded. But here is the real kick in the teeth. The digital footprint for the wire transfers, the IP addresses authorize these movements from the shelter's accounts. Felix clicked a few more times. They bounce around, but the point of origin is routed directly through the router in your home office. Lincoln felt a cold, tight knot pull taut in his chest. If the IRS or the FBI audits the shelter. Felix continued, his voice dropping. They see millions of dirty cartel money coming in. And they see the authorizations to wash it through construction fronts coming from your personal laptop. It bypasses Vincent entirely. You are holding the bag. It's a textbook RICO setup. They'll seize everything you own and put you in a concrete box for the rest of your life. Noreen was right. Vincent had built a flawless guillotine. He was just waiting for the right moment to drop the blade. There's more, Felix said, clicking into another folder. This one contained audio files. Looks like she bugged his office before she got too sick. Let's see what we have. Felix clicked on a file dated 4 months before Noreen's death. Static hissed through the speakers, followed by the clinking of glasses. Then Vincent Morrow's voice filled the room. It was warm, jovial, the same voice that had toasted at Lincoln's wedding. Lincoln is losing his edge. Vincent's recorded voice echoed. The wife is sick. He's distracted, pumping all his cash into doctors and hospitals. It's pathetic. We run a business, not a hospice. Another voice spoke. Raspy older. Carmine a capo who ran the South Side docks. You gonna make a move, Vince? I don't need to make a move. Vincent laughed. I'm letting the feds make the move for me. I've got the shelter wired tight. Give it another year. Let her die. Let him grieve. When he is entirely isolated, I tip the alphabet boys. They raid his house, they find the digital trail, he goes away for life. I step up, keep the families united, and we double our margins without his outdated moral code getting in the way. The recording clicked off. Silence descended on the sub-basement. Felix slowly took his hands off the keyboard, staring straight ahead, terrified to look at his boss. He had just played a tape of the underboss plotting treason. Men died for hearing less. Lincoln didn't move. He stared at the blank screen. Vincent had mocked his grief. Vincent had weaponized his dying wife. Vincent had sat at his dining room table, eating his food, drinking his wine, all while digging a grave for Lincoln to fall into. Felix, Lincoln said. His voice was a flat line. Yeah, boss? Felix squeaked. Copy all of it to an encrypted flash drive. Wipe these hard drives, then wipe your own servers. Scrub this room clean. Done? Lincoln turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. Boss! Felix called out hesitantly. What are you going to do? Lincoln paused with his hand on the doorknob. He didn't look back. I am going to host a dinner party. Preparation requires patience. Lincoln spent the next 48 hours dismantling Vincent Moro's life from the shadows. He didn't use guns or explosives. He used accountants' offshore proxies and leverage. Before Vincent even sat down for dinner, his bank accounts in the Caymans were drained. His construction fronts were quietly acquired by a shell corporation Lincoln controlled. His loyal men on the docks were paid double to take an unexpected vacation. Vincent was a king ruling over a kingdom of smoke. He just didn't know the wind had already blown it away. Thursday evening arrived, bringing a bitter, biting cold that frosted the windows of the Costa estate. The dining room was a cavern of dark wood and dim lighting, anchored by a massive mahogany table. Crystal glasses caught the low light of the chandelier. Upstairs, Hazel sat on the edge of her bed. The bruising on her face had faded to a sickly yellow, and the swelling was down. She wore a simple black sweater Maria had provided. She listened to the heavy tires of luxury SUVs crunching over the gravel driveway below. A knock sounded at her door. Lincoln stepped in. He wore a tailored black suit, utterly immaculate. He looked like a man going to a funeral. They're here, Lincoln said. Hazel stood up. Her good ankle bore her weight easily now. What do you want me to do? Stay here. Lock the door. Do not come down until I send Paul for you. She looked at him, searching his face for any crack in the armor. There was none. He was terrifyingly calm. Lincoln, don't let him talk his way out of it. Noreen said he was a snake. Snakes only bite when they have fangs, Hazel. Lincoln replied softly. I've already pulled his. Lincoln turned and walked down the grand staircase. He entered the dining room just as Paul escorted Vincent and Carmine through the double doors. Vincent was a handsome man in his late 50s, with silver hair swept back and a bespoke navy suit. He smiled broadly, his teeth white and predatory. He opened his arms, walking toward Lincoln. Lincoln, look at you. Vincent boomed, clasping Lincoln by the shoulders and kissing his cheek. You look rested. I haven't seen you this sharp in months. The mourning period is lifting, yes. Lincoln offered a tight, brief smile. Something like that. Sit, Vincent. Carmine. Carmine, older and heavier, grunted a greeting and took a seat. He looked uncomfortable pulling at his collar. He didn't like the Costa estate. It was too quiet. Maria served the first course in silence. Seared scallops over risotto. Vincent poured the wine himself, $1,000 Barolo from Lincoln's cellar. He raised his glass. To family. Vincent toasted, looking Lincoln dead in the eye. And to the future. Lincoln picked up his glass. He didn't drink. To the future. For 20 minutes the room was filled with the clinking of silver against porcelain. Vincent did most of the talking. He complained about the harbour masters, discussed the rising costs of steel for his construction firms, and pitched a new racket involving the city's waste management contracts. Lincoln simply listened. He watched the way Vincent ate. Greedy. Entitled. He watched the man who had sat at Noreen's hospital bedside, holding her frail hand, all while counting the days until her heart stopped beating. "You're quiet tonight, Lincoln," Vincent noted, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. "More quiet than usual. Everything all right with the ledger I sent over the quarterly numbers for the shelter this morning?" "I saw them," Lincoln said. He set his fork down. The sound echoed sharply in the large room. "They were very clean, Vincent." Vincent smiled. "We run a clean operation over there, just like Noreen wanted." Lincoln didn't blink. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. He set it on the polished mahogany table. He placed his finger on it and slowly slid it across the wood. It stopped exactly an inch from Vincent's plate. Vincent looked at the drive. His smile remained, but the corners of his eyes tightened. "What's this? A backup?" Lincoln said. "Of the real ledger." The room grew very still. Carmine stopped chewing. "I don't understand," Vincent said, a forced chuckle escaping his throat. "We only have one ledger, Lincoln." "There are two," Lincoln corrected, his voice dropping to a smooth, lethal register. "One shows charitable donations. The other shows $3 million of cartel cash moving through shell companies in Panama, washing through the shelter, and landing directly in your construction accounts. Accounts that I liquidated 3 hours ago, by the way." Vincent's face went entirely slack. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking gray and suddenly very old. He glanced at Carmine, but the older capo was staring at his plate, sweating profusely. "Lincoln, you're mistaken." Vincent started, his voice losing its booming confidence. "Someone is setting me up. If there's dirty money in the shelter, we need to find out who—" "I know who," Lincoln interrupted. "I have the IP logs. I have the wire transfers. I also have an audio recording of you and Carmine discussing how you were going to let my wife die so you could hand me over to the FBI. Carmine swore under his breath, pushing his chair back. Paul stepped out of the shadows by the door, a suppressed Heckler & Koch MP5 resting casually against his hip. Carmine froze. Vincent's breathing turned shallow. The mask of the loyal friend melted away, replaced by the cornered rat Noreen had warned about. He stared at Lincoln, his eyes darting frantically. "You can't do this," Vincent rasped. "I hold the union contracts. The other families answer to me. You kill me, you start a war you can't finish." "You don't hold anything, Vincent," Lincoln said. He finally took a sip of his wine. It tasted like ash. "Your bank accounts are empty. Your foreman took buyouts this afternoon. You are a broke old man sitting at my table eating my food." Vincent's hand twitched toward the inside of his jacket. Lincoln didn't reach for a gun. He just looked at Vincent with eyes entirely devoid of humanity. "Pull it. Give me a reason to make this slow." Vincent's hand stopped. He was trembling now. The reality of his absolute defeat crashed down on him. He looked at Lincoln, and in a final, desperate act of spite, he bared his teeth. "She was weak, Lincoln." Vincent spat spittle flying onto the table. "She was weak, and she made you weak, crying over a charity while we built an empire. I did you a favor. I tried to cut the dead weight." Lincoln stood up. He didn't rush. He buttoned his suit jacket. He walked slowly around the edge of the table until he stood directly behind Vincent's chair. Carmine squeezed his eyes shut. You underestimated her, Lincoln whispered, leaning down so his lips were inches from Vincent's ear. She was stronger than you, and she beat you from the grave. Lincoln drew his Glock 19, pressed the muzzle to the base of Vincent Moro's skull, and pulled the trigger. The suppressed shot sounded like a heavy staple gun. Vincent's head snapped forward, striking his dinner plate. Crystal glasses rattled. Blood pooled rapidly over the white porcelain, soaking into the risotto. Lincoln stepped back. His hand was perfectly steady. He looked at Carmine. The older man was violently shaking his hands raised in surrender. Look at me, Carmine, Lincoln commanded. Carmine opened his terrified eyes. You are going to walk out of here, Lincoln said, his voice cold and precise. You are going to go to the other captains. You will tell them Vincent was a federal informant stealing from the family. You will tell them I found out. And you will tell them that my mourning period is officially over. Yes, boss, Carmine stammered, scrambling out of his chair. I swear it. Yes. Get out. Carmine practically ran past Paul, disappearing into the hallway. Lincoln holstered his weapon. He looked down at the body of the man who had betrayed him, the man who had tormented Noreen in her final days. The rage that had been boiling in his chest for 48 hours evaporated. In its place, a strange, profound quiet settled over him. Paul, Lincoln said, turning away from the table. Clean this up, then go upstairs and tell Hazel she can come out now. 2 weeks later, the rain finally broke. A crisp, clear autumn sun hung over the city, casting long shadows across St. Jude's Cemetery. Lincoln walked down the gravel path. He wasn't wearing his heavy wool overcoat today, just a simple black jacket over a dark shirt. His steps were even, unhurried. Beside him walked Hazel. She moved without a limp. The bruises on her face were gone, leaving behind sharp, striking features and pale green eyes that were no longer clouded by exhaustion. She wore a tailored beige trench coat, a gift she had reluctantly accepted after Lincoln pointed out her denim jacket was ruined beyond repair. They reached the Costa family plot. The damage was gone. The shattered marble of Lincoln's grandfather's headstone had been replaced with a flawless new cut of granite. The neon paint had been meticulously power-washed from the statues, and Noreen's headstone stood pristine in the sunlight. Lincoln stopped at the foot of the grave. He didn't feel the crushing weight in his chest anymore. The hollow void that had defined his existence for 3 years hadn't disappeared, but its edges had softened. It wasn't a gaping wound. It was a scar. Hazel stepped forward. She knelt on the dry grass. From her pocket she pulled a small cluster of white hydrangeas, Noreen's favorite. She laid them gently at the base of the marble stone. We did it, Hazel whispered to the earth. He knows, and he's safe. She stayed there for a long moment, bowing her head. When she finally stood up, she looked over at Lincoln. She's at peace now, Hazel said quietly. You gave her justice. No, Lincoln corrected, looking at the white flowers. You gave her justice, Hazel. I just pulled the trigger. Hazel offered a small, crooked smile. A team effort, then. They stood in comfortable silence. The syndicate had stabilized entirely. The captains, terrified by the surgical precision of Vincent's demise, had fallen in line without a whisper of rebellion. The women's shelter was fully severed from the criminal enterprise, protected by a blind trust that Lincoln had set up. The feds had no trail to follow. So, Lincoln said, putting his hands in his pockets, your new apartment is ready, downtown. Doorman security, paid for the next 5 years. Hazel looked out over the rows of headstones. I know. Paul gave me the keys this morning. You don't have to go, Lincoln said. The words slipped out before his fiercely disciplined mind could stop them. He didn't take them back. Hazel turned to him. She saw the ruthless crime boss, the man who had executed his oldest friend over a dinner plate. But she also saw the man who had carried a bleeding, nameless girl out of the mud and wrapped her in his coat. "I'm not built for your world, Lincoln," she said honestly. "I don't belong in a fortress. I spent too much of my life trapped in rooms I couldn't leave." "I know." Lincoln nodded slowly. "But my world owes you a debt it can never repay. If you ever need anything, if anyone ever looks at you the wrong way, I'll call you," Hazel promised. She stepped closer, and to Lincoln's surprise wrapped her arms around his torso in a brief, tight hug. Lincoln stiffened for a fraction of a second, before tentatively resting a hand on her back. She pulled away, her green eyes bright. "Take care of yourself, Lincoln. Don't let the silence ring too loud." "I won't," he said. Lincoln watched her turn and walk back down the gravel path, her steps light and free. She was a survivor, a stray who had walked through hell and come out the other side with her soul intact. Lincoln looked back down at Noreen's grave one last time. He touched the cool marble. "Goodbye, Noreen," he murmured. He turned his back on the ghost of his past, stepping off the grass and onto the path, walking out of the cemetery and back into the land of the living. If this dark, twisted tale of loyalty betrayal and slow-burn redemption kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel right now. What was your favorite moment of Lincoln's cold, calculating revenge? Did Hazel make the right choice leaving the fortress? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and share this video with your friends who love a gritty, grounded mafia romance drama. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next immersive storytelling experience.